Okay, hello. This is today's live blog. I'm not sure if it's a blog, but it's a live video. And today I'm going to be talking about the pleura, the cranial fluid, and the myelin sheath, and how you can go about healing these. And we're going to start with the pleura, little understood fluid around the lungs, and how it relates to our breath, and how by being aware of this you can really deepen your breath and also connect the breath in the abdomen to the breath in the chest. So around each lung there are two membranes, and there's a layer of fluid, the pleural fluid. It's around each lungs. It drops down. It's under the lungs, on top of the diaphragm. It's on the insides of the lungs, separate around each lungs, and that keeps the lungs fluid. So the lungs aren't actually attached to the ribs in any way. They're free floating in fluid, and that gives them the easy access of movement. So just having that particular visualization can start giving you a deeper breath, especially if you're doing holographic breathing. The holographic breathing will relate directly into this fluid in the lungs. If you're being aware of the lungs, that will give you a certain type of breath. But if you become aware of the pleura around the lungs, this will give you a deeper breath, and once you learn the anatomy of it, then it will also start attaching it to the breath through your abdomen. So it's good to know the anatomy, and well, I'm just going to describe it because I can't show you in the picture, but if you feel your ribs coming up to the sternum, so you're feeling your abdomen, the sort of running up that diamond shape coming into the middle, when you come to where the ribs join in the middle, that is the middle part of your diaphragm, and that's how high it is. It's right up to there. The lungs are above that area, so even though your ribs drop down a long way below that, the heart, the lungs, kind of above that line. Now they drop down a bit to the side, but not a great deal. They kind of arc down a bit. The rest of those ribs dropping down to the side, to the front, and right around to the back. Between the diaphragm and the ribs is a layer of pleura, or a layer of pleural fluid. The pleura are two membranes, one around the ribs and the other around the lungs. So the pleural fluid is what's in between those, and that drops down in the pleural cavity right down to the bottom of the ribs, all the way down. So that's a long way around, and that makes like a sheath around you, and you can practice breathing with that. The lungs aren't really in there. But if you have that visualization, notice it brings you in contact with the upper organs of the abdomen, because the organs are coming up inside the ribs. And then you've got the pleural fluid, and then you have the ribs. So it gives you a different visualization and a different feeling of your breath. Now, that pleural cavity and pleural fluid, especially where it goes around the back, this houses the back of the ribs, and that pleural cavity, the pleura dropping down to the lower ribs, that will cover the kidneys and adrenals. The adrenals, that notch right in the front, they're coming right up to there, and then the kidneys and adrenals are dropping down, right down, maybe a little bit lower, or the kidneys drop down a little bit lower than the lower ribs. So the diaphragm is moving up and down, and the pleura is being circulated and breathed in that area at the back and up into the middle. That is connecting you with the adrenals and kidneys. And this is how you can breathe, with the adrenals and the kidneys, and then they come down and connect together in the bladder at the front, and then this drops down to the penis vagina. And this is a circuit. This is called, or at least in holographic breathing, this is called the blue energy healing circuit. Now, we've been working with this for several months in the webinars, and we've got another webinar this Sunday where we'll be working with this precisely. I'll be giving the meditations, how it's activated, how we go through, but just starting to come aware of the pleura on top of the diaphragm there, between the diaphragm and the ribs, down the sides of the ribs, gives you a deeper breath, and then all around the lungs. So it's the outside bit and between the lungs, and right to the top, it comes up higher than the lungs as well. It comes up under the shoulder, under the collarbone. So this gives you a very fluid and easier breath just by becoming aware of this. It also primarily, this fluid, when you breathe with it, you may feel, even though it's kind of water, it's very close to being water, you may feel a blue quality, a quality of blue energy. And for me, this is because it connects. The primary organs connecting to this are the kidneys and adrenals and this blue energy circuit. And that's why the pleura has that energy. It's a different quality to the lungs. The lungs have a wider quality. The pleura around it is much more fluid. It's much more out to the sides. And it has this blue energy quality. Now, we've been relating this through the holography of the face as we've been going on, the different energies of the face and how they mirror in the body. And these energies, you know how Native Americans often have a line across here, the zygomatic arch. In us, that relates to this area. So when you're breathing with this area here, the cheekbones, the zygomatic arch right across in the middle, this relates to the pleura. Further in, it's the lungs. Further in again into the nasal passageways in the middle, it's the heart. But right out at the sides, this is the pleura. So you get this nice breath with the pleura there. And then as this drops around, I show all the points and which organs it relates to in the webinar. How to connect to those organs, how to connect to the energies. And then as it works back through the cranium opening and closing. In holographic breathing, it's easy to teach how the cranium breathes, how the cranial fluid breathes, how this vitalizes, heals the brain, heals the myelinated glial cells, which make up the myelin sheath. And as this area starts breathing, then you start becoming aware of the cranial fluid underneath it, around the brain, around the spine. I'm going to show you a picture. I think I'm going to show you a picture. I painted this myself many moons ago when I had nothing to do. There we have a picture of the brain, the brain stem coming into it and the cerebellum behind. So all around that, a layer around that, you have a cranial fluid. And by breathing with this air, you can connect to that cranial fluid. And that is inside the dura, the membrane around the brain called the dura, membrane around the lungs called the pleura. Now I wonder if they've got anything in common. And inside them, a layer of watery fluid. Cranial fluid, 99% water. Pleural fluid, I don't know its exact consistency, but I'm sure it's pretty much the same. And then within the brain, there's cavities, large ventricles, which are also full of cranial fluid and have a membrane, and that's called ependymal cells, I think. And I'm going to show you a picture of those and how they connect to. Here we have penis, well, it's the vagina really, the penis would go further down, bladder, kidneys, adrenals, there we have. And then coming up, this is the cranial fluid in the center of the spine. This is the fourth ventricle, which would be, that would all be the penis, vagina, or relate to it. Comes up, this is the bladder, then you have the kidneys, and on the top, the adrenals. So this central column fluid also would teach how to breathe with this. And as soon as you move into that, again, in the brain is also cranial fluid. It's not a solid thing, it is fluid. There we have the brain. See all the spaces between those little sea anemones and starfish and different things, they're the cells. Between all of those, it's cranial fluid, but it has a different energy. It has more the energy of the lungs, but around it, same as face, you go into the big sinuses here, they're the lungs. You come out here into the zygomatic arch, it's the pleura, it's the outside of the cranial fluid, and it's this central line of the cranial fluid that's also relating to the kidneys and adrenals, and that has a breath. And that filters the cranial fluid, brings it down the central line of the body. So again, by breathing with this circuit, we'll go into this in more depth on Sunday, you can learn how to breathe with these fluids, how it moves down the center of the brain, how this fluid, the brain is 90% water. The cranial fluid is 99% water. So this is an aqueous solution. It's not a thing by any stretch of the imagination. It's like the sea with seaweed in it, with a membrane around it, and then more seawater around that membrane, and another membrane where it connects to the bones. So this is like the sea held together by tentacles. And the cranial fluid has an energy. And the cranial fluid is like a port. The cells are more dense. The cranial fluid is like the sea, and the higher energies coming down. It's like this big cup full of fluid. The high energies can pour down into this fluid, and then they can start moving into the cells, can spread out through the nerves, which are surrounded by the myelin sheath, spread through the whole body. In this way, the brain becomes a portal for higher energies to arrive and for earth energies to release up. And the outside layer of fluid more relates to these blue energies, the kidneys, the adrenals, the bladder, the penis and vagina. There's that quality and energy to that. And then the inner ones, the ventricles and down through the center of the spine, relates that. Then this fluid releases off down through the nerves. I'm teaching a new anatomy for this. That for me, the cranial fluid, there's no alternative actually, but the cranial fluid travels off down through the nerves. Now, if you want to heal your myelin sheath, if you feel you're aging and that is deteriorating, or that it is some way impaired, and there's lots of illnesses where this is getting impaired. I had Lyme's disease for a long time, and one of the reasons I've investigated is that the Lyme's disease attacks the neural tissue, the myelinated glial cells, the neurons, the astrocyte cells. It attacks these, so kind of need to build new ones after a while. And they say you can't, but actually you can. They're discovering now you can grow new brain cells. You may have to try a little bit harder, but that image in that word, myelin sheath, a rubbery sheath covering the nerve. One, it's not accurate. Two, it's really detrimental for healing that area. You need a true and proper visualization of what the myelinating glial cells really are. And I'm going to do that for you. Don't say I don't give you anything. I painted lots of pictures, especially for you. Here we have one. This is a cross section of I painted these all back in 2012. And to explain this all. So you've got this sheath, which isn't really a sheath, it's a cell. There's the head of the cell there and the nucleus, and then the cell body wrapping around loads and loads and loads and loads of times. And there's intercellular fluid within it. And then around it, this clear area, this is cranial fluid. So this is across the, and in the middle, that's the axon. That is where the charge or the electricity from the neurons is traveling. And before, this is taught as a rubbery sheath. And maybe this, well, this is a cell. You know, you don't want to call a cell a rubbery sheath. I mean, that is just degrading, really. This is a cell with intercellular fluid, and then you've got cranial fluid around here. And I teach this in great depth, how this all works, how it flows from one cell to another, but in a very simple way. It's cranial fluid. Cranial fluid is 99% water with salt added to it. So it's a salt water solution. And they talk about this rubbery sheath, which has no life to it whatsoever, as keeping the electrical charge inside. Well, I think that's rubbish, because in actual fact, what's lining the cell in the middle is salt water, which is one of the best conductors of electricity you get. And my feeling is, yes, it can't escape directly out because there's layers and layers of this cell, but my feeling is that charge spirals and can't get all the way out, and then spirals all the way back into the middle. So it is contained, but that electricity is opening and closing through the cranial fluid in this cell. And I show pictures of that, and we'll do a webinar just working with that. But you can see from this diagram, say a parasite or in Lyme's disease, they're called spiral somethings, break the outside of this. It completely breaks down the whole integrity of the cell, because the fluid inside can flow out and these membranes will start sticking together, and then the life in this cell is impaired. And that, for me, is how the myelin sheath. Now, the myelin sheath is made up of lots of these joining together. And by knowing what they are, that they are lots of little cells that encapsulated cranial fluid, and being able to breathe with them. And again, the same as the pleura and the pleural fluid, the dura and the cranial fluid, there's a membrane. Fluid between two membranes relates to the blue energy circuit, the kidneys, the adrenals, the bladder, the penis, vagina. And when I was working with the ventricles, the lateral ventricles here, the third ventricle in the middle, dropping down to the fourth ventricle in the brain stem, down through the center of the spine. Whenever I worked with those, even though it's exactly the same cranial fluid, as in between the cells of the brain, it had a different quality. You drop into this very blue, bit more electric energy of this circuit, the adrenals, the kidneys, and this circuit is overburdened in lots of people. Their adrenals are burnt out, their kidneys are burnt out, just because of what is going on Earth at this minute. And people are trapped in this stress that's going on from all sides. So it drop into that from a much whiter energy around and connecting to the higher self. Suddenly it be in this energy, and as it went out through the nerves, it would be the same thing. It'd be this blue energy. And for me, the cranial fluid in the ventricles has got the nourishment to go out and feed the nerves as they go out. And we're going to show another picture that will give you a wonderful visualization, so you can visualize the myelin sheath rather than that word, which is totally dead. Sheath, think of it as like dry membrane, or when you get a bit more medical, a rubbery sheath. Try healing that if you can. Here they are, the axons in the middle, and the myelinated glial cells. They're separate cells, each one is alive. See the fluid between each one. Between each of these, there's millions or thousands of little tentacles joining them together. So the surface area is hugely increased, and the fluid from one can flow into the fluid from the other. So you get these streams of cranial fluid running down. You have a sheath, which is, sheath is a bad, you have a cell, big flat cell that is wrapped around the axon, and in between each layer of this cell, it magically encapsulates cranial fluid, and it seals it all in except for the ends where it joins to the next cell. So you have rivers of fluid, cranial fluid, flowing off down through your nerves. If you just had a picture of your body and you just had the nerves, you would see the whole body pretty well exact. Maybe the eyes would be slightly different, but everything else, it would fill out the body pretty well in exactly the same way. You wouldn't be able to tell much difference because the nerves, they fill out everything. So you get the portal into the brain and the higher energy coming in. And then it's full of cranial fluid with different qualities around the outside, between the dura, and I forgot what the one on the inside between that is called. Maybe the pia mater, I don't know, something like that, pia mater, I can't remember. You have the cranial fluid that relates more to the kidneys and the adrenals, the blue energy circuit, all in the brain. That's a much whiter fluid. Then you come into the ventricles, and again you come into this blue energy. So it's pretty well the same fluid, made in the same way, bringing oxygen. Again, cranial fluid. Don't call it cranial fluid. If you want a nice visualization for the brain where you can heal your brain, have a visualization that is true. Cranial fluid. What does cranial fluid mean to you? I bet most people it means just jack nothing. Think water. It's full of water, 99% water. That water is full of oxygen to come out of the blood, all that oxygen for feeding the nerves. Full of glucose for feeding the nerves. Full of salt for firing the neutrons and just being a sea. So just think of that whole area as some cells that look like squids and fish and starfish and jellyfish, and trying to remember the word, sea urchins with all the tentacles around, all floating around in this highly sumptuous seawater with oxygen and glucose in it. And that also receives God through the top of their head, or lower energy to rise up through it and go home, and that spreads off, flows down in these rivers around the axons in the middle of the nerves in the myelinated glial cells. Then you start having a visualization where you can heal yourself by just looking at what is actually there, rather than calling it a myelin sheath, some cranial fluid, some pleura. Just knowing where the pleura is and what it does deeply enhances your breath. Knowing what the cranial fluid actually is deeply enhances your ability to heal the neural cells and to be in connection with the higher energies. Just knowing what the myelin sheath is. It's not a sheath. It's billions and trillions of separate little cells, all alive. They have got an incredible geometry, just incredible. I'm going to do a whole webinar showing you the spirals and different shapes of water that go on within these myelinated glial cells. For me, they are the one cell in our body that there is something magnificent going on. Salivating just thinking about them. You can see what gets me going. Myelinated glial cells. I'm not a normal type of person. But anyway, we're going to be working with that on Sunday. Why don't you come and join us this Sunday, 7:30 to 9:30 UK time? I'll put a link below to my website. I'm not even sure. I think there is on the webinar page. There'll be a link and you can come and join us. So why don't you book out that 2 hours, teach you how to breathe with holographic breathing, how to work through the holography of the face, how it connects to the body, how these areas connect to the blue energy circuit, what the blue energy circuit is, the energies of that, and how it relates to the pleura and the pleural fluid, the dura and the cranial fluid. I'm not going to call it the myelin sheath. The myelinated glial cells and their spiraling healing fluid inside. How to connect with those, how to work with those, how to heal yourself with holographic breathing. Come along, come and enjoy. I love you all. Well, I just feel good I love making these little live videos because there's less. I start and I don't know what to say, and then this white energy starts coming down. I just feel happier and happier. So from me and that white energy, hope to see you on Sunday. All right, bye.